Thanks for the purple time, Owen. Yeah, I got a disappointed shake of the head from Bram and others, and Eddie's were there too. So, all right, Steve Richard, Maricopa County Recorder, talking about voter registration. And I sometimes feel that voter registration is the forgotten component of the entire election ecosystem, but it's a critical component of the election ecosystem, because without input, we do not have output. We talk often about, transporting those early ballots, tabulating the results, curing ballots, adjudicating ballots, but we don't talk that much about that first process, and that is so critically important, because the notion of being able to inject willy-nilly ballots from all over the country is a readily falsifiable notion, because we only assign tabulated votes to registered voters. To have a vote, you must be a registered voter. To be a registered voter, we have to do an identity check. We do that identity check either with the Motor Vehicle Division or with the Social Security Administration. To be able to be an early voter, you have to have a location. We confirm that with our GIS team, and then we send out a voter registration card. If that voter registration card comes back as undeliverable, we can't put you on the voter registration rolls. So when we talk about something like the cast vote record after the election, that's assigned to every single voter registration profile. So if someone were to hypothetically say that they flew in a plane from South Korea and they had 20,000 ballots that they injected into the system, well, first, we don't just take loose ballots. As we've discussed before, those ballots have to come back in that green envelope, and that green envelope has to be signed and has to have a barcode. And what does that barcode link to? It links to a voter registration profile who has registered, who has shown identity, and who has been confirmed on the back end. So very important component that I think sometimes is left unaddressed. We closed voter registration for the November general election a week and a half ago. You can still register to vote, but if you register to vote at this time, you will not be eligible for the November general election. Ordinarily, the voter registration deadline is 29 days before election day. This year, because that fell on Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, it was 28 days before election, which was Tuesday, October 11th. At close of books, we received, as I mentioned last week, approximately 25,000 voter registration forms in the last 2 days of the voter registration deadline. We've now input all of those in, and we are in what's called the closed books period, whereby we have the official voter registration numbers that will be in effect for the November general election. And rumble, please. Wonderful, thank you. And as you can see from the screen, those are the voter registration numbers. Now, the first thing that jumps out to people, at least on Twitter, which of course is entirely reflective of the population at large, and everyone knows this bastion of all reason and truth, people immediately talked about independence being the largest, quote, party in Maricopa County. While this hasn't happened in a number of years, this has happened previously. And I looked at 2014. In 2014, before the November general election, was the last time that independents and party not designated was the largest party in Maricopa County. So it's been a good number of years. Prior to the November 2020 general election, Republicans were the largest party by about 75,000 voter registrants. So that reflects a lot of work by our voter registration team. That reflects a lot of effort over the last year and a half to send out mailers, to do everything that we can possible and within the confines of both the National Voter Registration Act and state law to make sure that our voter rolls are as accurate as is possible. So really this has been a priority. I'm very proud of the voter registration team with all that they have done in this respect. They've also benefited from new partnerships with ERIC, new mailings through ERIC, and additionally through a number of additional mailings because of the redistricting period. So the redistricting period, while it was a nuisance to many, and you have to now figure out your new legislative districts and your new congressional districts, it also afforded us the opportunity to send out an additional voter registration card, which means we get to send out 2.5 million pieces of mail that can then trigger the NVRA process whereby we can move you to inactive. And so that was another thing that was very beneficial in helping us stay in terms of very clean voter registration rules. And the last thing I want to touch on is when it gets down to election time and it gets exciting, there's a lot of groups that really want to participate in the electoral process. and they want others to be able to participate in the electoral process. And I truly believe that for the vast majority of people, this stems from a very good place. Unfortunately, there are some people who are sloppy about their practices, or don't go about their practices in the best manners. And for that reason, we continue to see, especially in paper forms, a large number of forms that are delivered right before the voter registration deadline that have incomplete information, that have inaccurate information, that are seemingly done on behalf of the voter who did not solicit that update to their voter registration profile. And anyone who does that, if you're part of an organization that does that, you're doing a disservice to your organization, you're doing a disservice to voters, and you're doing a disservice to the Maricopa County voter registration team. We're going through those. We will make sure that we do everything possible to make sure that all eligible voters who were registered in time for this November general election are able to cast a ballot that is tabulated. But at the same time, we don't want to inflate our voter registration totals, and we certainly don't want to interfere with anybody's ability to have their information accurately if it was manipulated by somebody who should not have been manipulated. So I think that's all that I wanted to say on voter registration forms, and then I think Ray is going to talk about early voting.
Let's see if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions
Who's going to
on these matters?
Well,
Go ahead, Ray.
who's going to speak to the issue the Secretary of State brought up?
I will happily speak to that, but would you like me to do it at the end, or would you like me to do it now?
Let's go ahead and take that.
Master of Ceremonies.
Let's go ahead and take that question.
All right.
What's the impact and how did it happen?
So about 2 weeks ago, our voter registration team identified an issue with some of the HAVA checks for citizenship status when we were inputting forms, and we were getting return information that didn't seem consistent with our records and was containing inaccuracies. We notified the Secretary of State's office. We then followed up with the Secretary of State's office. We reached out to the Governor's office to get the Motor Vehicle Division, and the Motor Vehicle Division and the Secretary of State's office this weekend identified an issue whereby the HAVA check to elevate somebody to full citizenship status wasn't being performed necessarily as it should be. Secretary of State's office identified potentially 6,000 voter registration forms that it would affect. We then ran a query, and we found out that of those 6,000, 3,550 are in Maricopa County. Now we're going through those to see which are hard matches, such that it really is a voter who is in the system who should have been elevated to full ballot status but has not, and which are soft matches, in which it is a different voter registration profile, in which case it should remain a federal only ballot. Of that 3,550, 651 is the total universe of people who might have been mailed a ballot, who were mailed a ballot that was a federal only ballot, but should have been mailed a full ballot. Now we are still determining the number. That is the maximum limit of the number of people who could have been mailed a federal only ballot inappropriately. We're going through this. Like I said, we received this information from the Secretary of State earlier this week. We will reach out to every single affected voter once we determine that number, and we will do everything that we possibly can to make sure that every voter is able to vote a full ballot if he or she is entitled to do so.
How would a voter know if they might have been affected? Is there a profile of a voter registration that would have been affected by this?
So you could go on, if you were proactive about it, you would have seen in a voter registration card, it would have demarcated U.S. federal only, or if you went on to beballotready.vote, you would have seen that it was federal only. But also, when you receive that ballot, you would see that there's only 2 contests on that ballot. Now, we've talked here about how there's 65, 70, 75, 80 plus contests on ballots throughout Maricopa County. For a federal only ballot, you would just have the U.S. Senate race and the appropriate U.S. House race. And so a voter could recognize that, say that's not what I should be receiving, and reach out. Now, we will be, like I said, as soon as we determine what this universe is, reaching out to all these voters proactively.
I guess what I'm getting at is, would the mismatch have occurred for a particular kind of voter? I thought I heard you say, if I had to update my citizenship status or provide actual proof, would that have made?
No, it wouldn't. It was
just random?
It was randomly, but this was on pulling that HAVA, Help America Vote Act information from the MVD, which is used to confirm citizenship.
And are you saying that it was your office that discovered this and then alerted the Secretary of State?
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Just tell us who you're representing.
Sasha Hefko with the Arizona Republic. Brent, my first question. Are we gonna get a chance to ask questions after Greg speaks? Okay, just wanted to check on that. In that case, with people watching ballot boxes and now with people outside McTac, what's the line in terms of voter intimidation? Like, where does this cross the line between being just people watching, which they are allowed to do, versus actual intimidation? Particularly the outdoor ballot boxes, does a 75-foot limit apply to them?
So
That's two questions.
that's something that we're having the county attorney's office look at right now, and I believe the Secretary of State's office is looking at it right now. If you encounter that, if you're a voter who feels that you are intimidated, that you are deterred from participating in the process, we ask that you report that. It's something that we will investigate every single alleged occurrence, but we have not come up with a legal framework by which we are evaluating that yet.
So in that case, is it clear when like law enforcement or some other type of official would respond to a complaint?
I'm not prepared to answer that right now, I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyone else?
Chairman Gates, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you.
Since we were on that subject, Chairman Gates, can you share where this has happened and how often poll workers have been confronted?
Well,
for voters?
yeah, so in the context of the general election, it's my understanding today was the first day that this has happened, and it's down at McTech. And it did happen previously during the primary election. It happened as the votes were being counted. And it's important that everyone understand, because we greatly appreciate our elections workers, and we are working closely with law enforcement. We have the sheriff's, deputies out there. We're getting people in and out in a safe fashion. But we saw this before during the primary. We had buildings that were, they had access to these folks, and they were standing on the roof taking pictures of people. So again, this is the sort of thing that's going on. This is the sort of thing that's been normalized, and it has to stop. That's why we're encouraging these people who are passionate about the election to get involved. They don't have to stand outside and take pictures harassing people. We want them to come inside, volunteer, maybe with the party, as a poll observer, or as a worker on election day. But this sort of activity, in Maricopa County, we're saying that it's done. We're going to protect our elections workers, and we're going to continue to shine a light on this. And so when we have to take certain actions to protect our elections workers, if there are campaigns that accuse the county of not being transparent, I'm going to push back on it. They did it during the primary, and if they do it again, I'm going to push back on it. We're running the most transparent election in Maricopa County's history, and we're also protecting our elections workers. We can do both, and if the campaigns have issues, they can contact us. They have our phone numbers. They don't need to go out and send incendiary tweets. Thank you.
Okay. Some
Yeah.
more questions, since you did mention the bipartisan poll workers. I think you know how people look over this when they find tooth comb. How bipartisan is this group of poll workers bipartisan?
Yeah, and I think that I'll call Scott Jarrett up, maybe can give us some more specifics on it. But it's interesting you asked that, because I saw Helen Purcell recently, and I said, Helen, you heard about what's going on? Absolutely. And her comment was, you guys are doing a lot better job of recruiting Republicans than back in my day. As a Republican, I've been a Republican since I was in high school. For whatever reason, we've had a little bit more difficult time recruiting Republicans to come. But as Scott will reference, we are working closely with the County Republican Party, and you'll see that the numbers are very strong. But again, this is it's a tough time to get people to work. Everyone knows about labor challenges that we have out there right now. But again, I'll just take one moment. This lawsuit that was filed by the RNC and the Arizona Republican Party is no basis in fact and was a political stunt. And the reality is that the Maricopa County Republican Party is working very closely with us, and I'll let Scott Jarrett talk about that now.